What up, Misfits? Welcome to the Misfit Heroes podcast. My name is Chris, and together we are going on a journey. Misfits, if you've been following along on this journey of mine, in previous episodes, I've talked about starting a nonprofit company. Now, nonprofits are great and all, but what if you could have a business that is profitable while working to solve a cause and make an impact in your community as well? Well, that is where the B Corp certification comes in. And my guest tonight is super knowledgeable about them. Nathan Stuck is the creator of Be Local Georgia, a Georgia-based nonprofit that focuses on helping companies get B Corp certified and use their business as a force for good. And if you're wondering what companies are B Corps, well, there's tons of brands that you probably already know, with more added daily. We discuss what a B Corp is, how companies can become B Corp certified, the Great Resignation and how the concepts in B Corp certification can combat employees wanting to leave, and how businesses big and small are using their business as a tool for good deeds. Are you ready to get certified, B? Well, Misfits, please welcome Nathan Stuck.
Playing the Misfit Heroes podcast.
All right, Nathan Stuck, welcome to the Misfit Heroes podcast. I'm very excited to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, and I'm just excited that I've always considered myself a misfit hero. So I feel like this is a fitting podcast to have found and to be on. This is great.
It's a good name, right?
It's a wonderful name. There's a lot of us out there.
I listened to you on a couple other podcasts before we got started, and people call you the king of B Corps in Georgia, just FYI. So I got a lot of slack from my last episode. I messed up and called myself the president of podcasts, but I don't know what I was doing. So my first question to you is this. Is it good to be king?
I mean, it's a title I never looked for, and it's evolved from Mr. B Corp Georgia into the King of B Corp. Yeah, I mean, if the shoe fits, wear it. So when I started all this, like getting involved in this community 4 or 5 years ago, there was no real unified energy, and I just kind of ran with it, and it's been fun. And honestly, you get to meet a ton of really cool people. So yeah, I think it's good. I'm not a tyrannical king either. So I'm a king of the people.
A man of the people. I love it. Well, welcome to the show. Tell me about Be Local Georgia. I mean, how did that come to fruition? What made you want to get involved with this line of work?
All by happenstance. So I have a long and winding career journey that I'll spare you, but I never really found purpose in any of the jobs I had done. But, I always considered, I think there's, even though I'm pretty much Southern at this point, I have the Midwestern work ethic because
right.
My family's all from Michigan. And, so whatever you're going to do, be great at it. And so I had a lot of jobs that kind of, I think, set me up for success that I didn't realize were, but I kind of was looking to reset. And I went back to get an MBA at the University of Georgia in 2015. Okay. And that was after a year where like I had gone from 2 jobs in 8 years to 4 jobs in 18 months. And then another 2 jobs where now I've gone from professional white collar, like my last job was director of sales and marketing for the German markets. And then all of a sudden I was like, I'm going to do this MBA thing. I can't do another day in this job. And I quit. I drove back to Athens. I figured trying to figure out what's going to happen. The MBA was like an obvious, except that it was June. And if you know anything about MBA applications, those are long past due. So I had a year to kill. And also things like, the GMAT, you need to take that. So I was kind of figuring out like, okay, how am I going to pay the bills for a year? So I drove an Uber and I did setup shifts at the convention center and I bartended and all these industries I'd never, even in high school, like my blue collar job was reffing hockey where you're making $25 a game, 3 games a night, working 5 nights a week. I went to Europe every summer. I had a pretty good high school job. I mean, it's hard work, but it was pretty good money. And so I don't know, I was reading Thomas Piketty, Capital in the 21st Century, and I'd burned out on traditional capitalism, but I still loved business and its ability to solve problems. So right at the beginning of my second semester at UGA, there was a project that came to the Net Impact Club to work on a B Corp certification. And I had no idea what it was and worked on that project and loved my boss, loved his wife, just loved their aura and their energy around building something different that was still a traditional consulting business. And yeah, when I graduated, before I even graduated, honestly, they approached me. That first meeting was in January. So by my third semester of a 4-semester program, December, at their holiday party they invited me to, they were like, if you haven't figured this out, we're courting you. We want you to come work for us. And so I started in March and I graduated in May. So I'd already pretty much started working for them full time. And I don't know, I just saw this void in the ecosystem. I helped us finally get certified, and because that process took us a while, and just there's B locals around the country, and it was still a relatively new concept, but they were all more established markets that you would think you would traditionally find B Corps in, like Portland, Colorado, New York City, the Bay Area, LA, and I'm like, what's this guy trying to do down in Georgia? I was like, you know what? We had 8 B Corps at the time, and I think the requirement was you had to have at least 15, but I've never been one for rules or requirements. So I just went ahead and started one, and then just kind of asked for permission later. But yeah, it was just somebody needed to be the organizing force in the state and get the ball rolling and get momentum going. And so I just said, I don't know, why not me? And I was passionate about it. And again, going back to the whole backstory, this was just something that appealed to me from a sense of businesses can exist to make money. We can be profitable. We can, the same tenets of capitalism still exist. You get paid for the value you bring to the marketplace, all the things that I still believe in, but you can do it in a way that you rest your head, easily on your pillow at night, and you feel good about the impact you're making, environmentally, with your employees, with everybody, with all your stakeholders, and you still made some money that day. I think that's the win-win that just kind of sucked me in. Of if I'm going to be a driving force for something in my life, that's going to be it.
Well, that's awesome, man. I love your enthusiasm about it. And when you find your passion like that, I mean, it's like every person I speak to, they once they get that hook in them as to this is what I want to do. I mean, it just takes off. So I love what you're doing. Let's answer the question that is really the elephant in the room, because I'm sure there's a lot of people sitting here listening to this right now, and they're like, all right, man, what is a B Corp?
How did I know that one was coming?
Right. So, I mean, let's get it right out of the way. What is a B Corp, and why should businesses care about getting B Corp certified?
That's a great question. I love answering. So, and the best part is you hear me answering, you're like, you'd figure he'd be better at answering that by now. B Corps are for-profit businesses that believe in more than just shareholder capitalism. So the old Milton Friedman op-ed in 1970, if you ever get an MBA at Georgia, you can take my class and hear me lecture about this. But, essentially Milton Friedman posited that businesses exist solely for the benefit of their shareholders, and that is their only purpose. And what was the quote? Businesses in the business of doing business. And
Right.
B Corps believe that, we should be looking out for all of our stakeholders. And if you aren't able to do that, you probably don't have a financially viable business model. So it's the only third-party certified or certification for your business, much like LEED is to a building, certified organic is to a milk, or fair trade for a coffee. It's the only third-party audited, overseen certification that you can get. So I call it the gold standard of corporate social responsibility, especially now in a day and age where everybody has a social mission. Everybody's about diversity, equity, inclusion. Everybody's about the environment. Everybody cares about the carbon footprint. Everybody puts their employees first and lets them bring their authentic selves to work. Well, how can you verify that? You can take this, what's called the B impact assessment, and then you can submit your answers, and then you can submit a bunch of documentation, and then B Lab, the parent nonprofit, will schedule a time with you to audit your answers and tell you whether you are actually walking the walk or you still have work to do. So I think it's a beautiful process to make you start to think more intentionally about your business and what you care about and the things. And I mean, even as a B Corp, I can give you countless examples of things we said we cared about that then you start putting your numbers together and you go, maybe we don't care about it as much as we thought we did because our actions haven't been there. So yeah, I mean, it's just a really cool movement. I think now we're probably somewhere in the 4,500 to 5,000 range worldwide. I mean, the number just keeps I've been showing up on podcasts for a couple of years now. And it was like, we're at 3,500. And it was like, we're at over 4,000. Even in Georgia, we're at 8 and now we're at 19. So yeah, it's growing exponentially. And I think businesses are seeing it as the second part of your question is a beautiful opportunity to differentiate themselves to customers, to both potential and current employees, to their communities. Is just a company that, we have a brewery here, Creature Comforts. Their slogan is that Athens will be better off because Creature Comforts was here. And I think that's like the epitome of the B Corp mantra of like, our communities and our people that work for us, everybody will be better off because we did business the right way.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like, leave the world better than you found it, right? And I also noticed that it kind of sounds like keeping businesses, like keeping the marketing team in check. Like it's easy to say, oh yeah, we do this, we do that. We've got this cause, but how well do you really have that cause,
Yeah. And I mean, you think about the old years of like websites and you go on there like about us, our team, and it's like the clip art and there's like, the person in a wheelchair, and then it's just like the most forced diversity you've ever seen. You're like, no, like when we made our culture videos, like, no, we're just going to shoot our own team in the office. And
right.
like, if we've been doing it right, we should be just fine. So yeah. And I've even heard our boss describe it as, guardrails for corporate decision making. So, when you're making a decision, you're thinking about something like, how does this align with who we say we are? There's that brand gap between, perception and reality, and who you think you are and what, your stakeholders say you are. And so I think that's an important exercise too, of like, that's fine if you think you're great and you might be doing great things, but if your people aren't living that, if your team isn't living that, then it is what it is. It's not great. So, I think a lot of this too, and the quantification, the measuring of things, hold you accountable. I think that, like if your satisfaction rate drops, like you can sit there and go like, well, they're ungrateful because we're a great company. Well, maybe we should listen. So, yeah. And I think that's one of the cool empowering parts of working for a B Corp is, I do our employee survey every year, so I can attest to that practice of like, hey, here's what everybody's saying, here's the feedback. And it's just me and the CEO on that first go round. And then using that to hold us accountable and keep the marketing team in check. Greenwashing's a thing. It's not always, sometimes the outcomes of greenwashing are good, but I watched the Super Bowl ads and I wondered to myself, I'd love to see some of their annual impact reports. I'd love to see how much they actually champion some of these causes that they're putting out there, because a good marketing team can put a lot of lipstick on a pig.
Yeah, that is a great way of putting it. But now I can't get the image out of my head. Thanks. Well, we talked about this a little bit before you got onto the podcast, but I want to ask you a real important question, because this is going to sound like a dummy one, but what is the difference between a B Corp and a benefit corporation? Because they are, you mentioned earlier that they are not the same thing, but they are kind of intertwined, similar. So can you explain that a little bit for people that don't understand?
Yes. And one of these days I'll fully understand it. So public benefit corporations, public benefit corps, they are legal incorporation statuses. So you can incorporate in I think it's 39 states that have that legislation passed. You can incorporate as a PBC, or sometimes it's a PBC or a public benefit LLC. So depending on the state, there's different rules and parameters to how you can incorporate. And then I'm trying to think of what I would want to say next. So there's that element. And then depending on the state, there's also like different requirements that go into to incorporating as a public benefit corporation. Like, what is your public benefit? Some states' legislation is more watered down than others. Like in the state of Georgia, I'm pretty sure you can say that your cause is like basketball. Right. That's our social purpose. And everybody's like, good enough. And then in some states, it's really like it has to serve a serious social purpose. Right. Like Delaware, I think, is considered like the ideal, the template for public benefit corporations. And then B Corps that's when you've actually gone through that certification process to get like the stamp of approval from B Lab on your company. And where there's some crossover is that B Lab is part of their legal requirement. You either have to be a public benefit corporation, incorporated as one, to really bake stakeholder governance into your model, because that's the whole premise, is to have some sort of legal backup. Or, so if you're an S Corp or a C Corp, you have to reincorporate as a public benefit corporation. If you're an LLC, you simply have to amend your articles of incorporation to include verbiage around and protections for stakeholders that basically, so in the case if somebody wants to scale and sell that, and it's happened in the past, it happened with actually the founders of B Lab were the founders of and one. And that's where this whole thing kind of started for them. And over time, they'd given up equity and things happened and an offer came in to purchase them. And they were kind of looking to exit anyway, but they had to take the offer in the best interest of their shareholders. They couldn't take the offer that was in the best interest of their stakeholders. So, yeah, I mean, and I forget what the legal term is, but you're literally legally not allowed to talk about. But what about our employees? We have factories in Asia that we're paying, American family living wages to. Doesn't matter. Like, you're not allowed to talk about it. Whatever's in the best interest of the shareholders is the offer you take. So that's really what it's trying to prevent. But yeah, that's the difference really, is legal incorporation versus certification. So there are public benefit corporations that are not B Corps, and there are B Corps who are not public benefit corporations. But a lot of B Corps are public benefit corporations, and every B Corp is either a public benefit corporation or they've amended their LLC operating agreement.
So it sounds like the B Corp versus versus a benefit corporation. A benefit corporation is your actual legal business entity, and a B Corp is just the certification that that certifies that your business is a type of organization that aligns to these principles. Is that right?
Yeah, and I would add too that, like, I'm not going to call it a red flag because that's probably too much of a generalization, but a public benefit corporation that is not in the process of certifying or has certified as a B Corp would probably kind of make me second, like how committed are you to those values and those ideals, or are you doing it? Because again, then it just comes into, is it just kind of part of the marketing play to say we're a public benefit corporation, and most people don't know what it is. They'll either generalize that you're a certified B Corp or just assume some level of virtue and give you points that maybe you haven't earned.
Right. Well, that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about because, it seems a little complicated for the average business owner. What is the certification process, and is it like a hefty task for certification? I think there's like an 80-point system I heard you talk about earlier. Or?
Yeah. So you have to get to 80. There's 200 possible points, and there's 5 sections. So the first section is workers. So there's the first section is governance. Wow. And I wanted to be your B Corp consultant.
Yeah.
So the first section is, sorry, a little Seinfeld reference never hurts. But the first section is governance, and it's everything from corporate transparency to, do you have an annual impact report? What's in it? What do you disclose internally? What do you disclose externally? Do you have a board of directors? What does that board of directors look like? How much power do they have? Have you amended, have you met all the legal ramifications, or not ramifications, definitely the wrong word, legal framework for B Lab and all their requirements. And then from there, there's a worker section that's everything from pay ratio top to bottom. So what's the CEO? Is he making, 1 to 5x what the lowest paid employee is? Is he making 6 to 10x? Is he making 11 to 15? Let's see what else goes in workers. Benefits. How much time off do they get to volunteer? How much time off do they get for parental leave? Is there parental leave or just maternity leave? Even things like, do you have one for us that was a very valuable, when you talk about the value of the intention, it was lactation break policy. If we, of course we would have had one. Like, we're not going to say no, but you think about the value of codifying something like that and putting it in your handbook when you have a new hire starting, or a potential new employee that wants to see the handbook before they start and see what all is in there and what benefits. Like, it's not a bad look for your company to go ahead and have that codified and know that it's valued by the owners of that business, and not just something that, like, yeah, just let us know when you need it. So
right.
Things like that, like little benefits that you might not think of, that, like, oh yeah, when that comes up, like, sure. Especially when you're small and scrappy and you're scaling. Like, we started this process at Ad Vic with 8 employees. And now we're at 150. Like, we didn't have a handbook. The vacation policy was, tell our CEO that you're going to be off. There was like, when are you off? Next week. Where are you going? Have fun. So that's the worker section. And then there's a community section that's, community impact. What percentage of revenue was donated in terms of dollars? What percentage of revenue was donated in terms of time, like volunteer time? What percentage of, like for us, it's everybody gets 40 hours to volunteer, and we have everybody track their impact in the community. So our number one volunteer, who's actually in North Carolina, he's in Raleigh, is hit 266 hours of volunteer time last year. I hit 235, and we've created a competition out of it. We've gamified that. So, and then what percentage of revenue is donated in terms of pro bono product or service? So between the two of those last year, we hit like 2.1% of our revenue was donated either in volunteer time or pro bono work. So things like that. The community section also houses all the DEI. I was talking about earlier, like walking the walk of, when you go through that process during the certification and you have cared about diversity. I mean, granted, we're in the IT space, but, I can think back to a time when we were doing this that, I think when we finally certified, we had around 30, 40 employees, and we had 74% of them were white men. And we're like, we're doing really well. And, the initial shrug of the shoulders is you're in IT. You're, like, it is what it is. This is, like, that's what the IT space looks like. And then it's like, well, what if we could be more intentional? So through that process, you start kind of like, okay, well, let's set goals. Like, I'm not even going to say our goal is 50. Like, well, let's just do better next year. And slowly but surely, now we're 46% white guy, which in the IT space is like, pretty good. But then it's like, okay, but we can also, there's also questions in that community section, like what percentage is, what demographics are you tracking? So, okay, so gender, race, even age, above 55, below 24, are you giving young people opportunities? Or are you giving, more senior employees opportunities? So, being able to codify that and actually think about diversity, equity, inclusion, starting with the quantification, and then you can goal set, then you can set strategy. You can kind of reverse engineer the process once you kind of, especially the bigger the company or you don't know. When you're early, it's pretty easy to be like, oh, women, we've got Karen, Jenny, Natalie, it's like, It's pretty easy to quantify. But as you get bigger, I think that process becomes, and it also, as you're growing and you're recruiting and you're putting that strategy together, it stays from, again, going back to the guardrails of corporate decision-making, it stays front of mind of where are we recruiting? What does our job description look like? What's in it? Is it inclusive to everybody? Even little things like women are less likely to apply for jobs if they don't check like 90% of the boxes. And it's a significant margin. It was Harvard Business Review research that was, I don't know, probably 10 years old. So we saw that. And when we weren't getting women applications, when we started recruiting out of undergrad, relook at the job description. So that's the community section. And I would say some of the tangible benefits that have come out of it, at least for us. And again, now we've scaled quite significantly. And then there's the environmental section, which for a long time, again, using us as an example, we do IT consulting. You're talking to me on our supply chain. It is a MacBook. The Blue Yeti I purchased for myself, my microphone, but the MacBook is our supply chain. So we kind of looked at the environmental section. I don't want to say we glossed over it, but we put a recycling program in place. We forced our office park didn't used to have recycling. That was honestly our CEO's wife that just literally went from calling them once a month to calling them once a week to calling them every day until they went and slapped a big sticker on one of the trash bins and wrote recycling. And we got a recycling truck to come. Yeah, that's how that happened. Never underestimate what you alone can do. So, so we always overlooked that. And then we started looking after because you have to recertify every 3 years, and we recertified in 2021 and started thinking like, okay, we have to recertify again in 2024. How do we improve our score? And I started looking at carbon neutrality and some of the offsets. And, and I started adding up like, well, we do travel. Obviously we didn't a lot of 2020 and a lot of 2021, but we do travel. We do rent cars and we do fly everybody in for the holiday party. And, we do have electric bills and we have remote, even our home offices are using energy to do work for our company. So it was like, well, let's look at scopes 1. So we did scopes 1 and 2 last year. And then we did scope 3 this for 2021. So I literally just got that bill in the mail yesterday, but it was like, that's pretty easy. We found a nonprofit partner down in Florida that helps with carbon offsets and invests the money in different projects. So it was like, okay. But again, it was like that journey to becoming a better company. So that's the environmental section. The last one's customers. So it's a lot around, do you sell their data? What do you disclose what you use their data for? Do you have a customer guarantee? Do you, is your website, how is it GDPR compliant? Or, then kind of, okay, well, if it's not GDPR, like kind of going down the brackets of like, what do you do? So making sure that, you're selling stuff, but you're also doing things in an ethical way. Yeah. That's the customer section. And there's a whole disclosure questionnaire, like you're not involved in, pornography, or I'm pretty sure it's pornography, weapons, and cannabis, I think are the 3. And then obviously you can't employ child labor, certain standard.
Right.
You can't have like ongoing like legal labor disputes and things like that. But yeah, that's the questionnaire in a nutshell. And in a nutshell, so to tell you, basically, to answer the other part of your question, it is fairly rigorous depending on size. I mean, there's a whole consulting ecosystem. I even have my own little kind of side consulting practice. There's universities that deal with NC State. Honestly, was the kind of the inventor of the university project, which is then what trickled down to UGA, where I had my opportunity, and then I've since scaled at UGA, bringing those projects in, getting students assigned, usually MBA students, but we pair our MBA students with sustainability undergraduate students and let them work together for a semester. And now we have the framework. We have a lot of the policies, the low hanging fruit stuff is pretty easy for us to give them. And so we can spend more of our time, actually letting the students consult and talk about best practices and figure out, complex solutions to maybe depending on their industry. But yeah, there's been a whole like little cottage industry of consultants pop up around the country helping with this as well. So, cause it's not easy, but it shouldn't let you scare it away from it. I think it's such an incredibly valuable process to go through to realizing what you're actually doing and starting to measure it. And again, reverse engineering from there to goal setting and strategy.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, it does sound a lot of work. As let's say I'm a business owner. I mean, there's, I see what it does for the business, but do you get a lot of pushback at all? I mean, is there a difference in business judgment between, hey, what's the return of investment on this versus, getting the values of this corporate social responsibility? I mean, what impacts does that have on corporate branding too?
So I think it's starting to be less and less. I mean, even conversations, I get, there's at least a knowledge of a general knowledge of what the B is and what the logo is. And like, okay, as companies that do good, and it's breaking away, I think, from more of the like, whatever you want to call it, the tree hugging stereotype or the drum circle stereotype of businesses.
Right.
So, honestly, one of the most powerful quotes I've ever heard came from the guy Guayaki that makes the yerba mate drink. The yellow cans of yerba mate. Yeah. And I heard him at a conference in Amsterdam. He said, "No profit, no purpose. Just remember that. Like, you got to make money."
Right.
And that still sticks with me, and I love it, and I love yerba mate. So there we go. It's a match made in heaven. But yeah, I mean, for the average CEO, I mean, I think about even when I think back if I put myself in my CEO's shoes 6 years ago, and he essentially outsourced it to students, but they only had 8 employees. But like, I now know a lot of the company backstory. Like, we weren't selling a lot yet. You know what I mean? We had made some pretty big investments in some pretty talented, like early stage, like these guys are going to be the executives. Like, she's going to run that whole customer success team. She's an executive. Like, and our 2 executive directors were 2 of our first hires that are still with the company. Like, but yeah, we needed to go sell some stuff. Like, so the thought that he made this a priority is kind of cool. Yeah. But then, the other element of, he also saw like, okay, there's some students that can help us do this because I don't have time to figure it all out.
Right.
And I'm not going to be able to do this on my own. And honestly, it's never going to get done. So if I'm serious about doing it, and this is where a lot of people, the consultants come in, if I'm serious about doing this, let's figure out a way to do it. And even a lot of companies, when it came for recertification, like they'll kind of create the role, like for, we'll call it the beekeeper. But if you have like, I'll give you a good example. One of the projects we worked on last year, it was their director of impact. It was an engineering company in Athens, and she took it to the CEO. He was bought in. If you don't have executive buy-in, it's never going to happen. But she led the charge and she championed it. And then when she needed data or she needed this, she, same thing with me. Like, if I need something from the CFO and he doesn't respond, I CC the CEO and boom, and hits my inbox in 10 minutes. So I think having that internal champion that, can help you get across the finish line. If you have somebody that's passionate about this kind of stuff, the CEO doesn't necessarily, the business owner doesn't necessarily have to do all the work. And that's part of why we created, or we're trying to scale the university footprint too, because it's such a nice offering. If they have somebody that can attend the meetings, as long as that executive is bought in, I mean, like any real C-suite sale, as long as the executive's bought in, but you've got somebody else that can champion the rollout and champion kind of the legwork. It is a lot of work, but if you have somebody that knows what they're doing, it can be simplified pretty quickly. And honestly, even from the consulting standpoint, people kind of balk at consultants, but you're probably looking somewhere between 3 and 10 grand. Like it's not like a $200,000 implementation to bring somebody outside in to help.
Right. And it's also somebody that is, has a vested interest in doing good for your company.
Yeah. And can help you go in. And again, I sorry, sometimes I think out loud as you said that, I remember kind of the second half of the question. A good consultant, a good student team with the right leadership overseeing them also understands the ROI element. And I think there was a tendency in this space to never want to talk about ROI because it sounds too Milton Friedman-esque. And ROI is important because it goes back to the no profit, no purpose. And I look at my role as I'm director of culture and strategic impact. I have a budget. If we make more money, my budget is a percentage of the revenue. We make more money and we're hitting that 2% target. I have more volunteer money. I have more money. I have more pro bono, hours to throw at nonprofits who want to implement Salesforce. All of my impact scales along with it. So having somebody like me in that seat who also has an MBA and understands how businesses make money and that we can't do everything or we'll go broke and we'll have no impact. I think part of that is the story that needs to be told. So how do you also realize that ROI so you can still scale the business? How do you use it as, the more companies I meet especially if their strategy involves, when I meet with people, I'll kind of ask them what are you looking to get out of this? And I'm not looking for the to save the world answer. Our CEO will tell you it was the right thing to do. Oh, yeah. That's his. And then the ROI has been a nice side effect, but he'll also tell you there's an ROI there that when, if I meet with a company and they tell me, well, we're looking to grow and, we need to hire, we're going to be hiring out of undergraduate, Gen Z, you better get on board. You better, they sniff and they will call your, out. They sniff it from a mile away.
Yeah.
So if you're not authentic and you're not doing it, and the B Corp logo to me is just the easiest way to go yep, we're doing it. They're verified. It's like a checkbox on Twitter. You're verified, you're legit, you're doing the work. And I think it signals to those employees, but also if you're doing it right, you're baking it into the culture. So then you're talking about a retention aspects beyond just, because any good recruitment program fizzles pretty quickly when people, look at most good DEI recruiting programs that fizzle because the I was missing, the inclusion was missing when they got there. But for most, if you sell culture that isn't real when they get there, even we ran into this where our recruiting team didn't fully understand and they were selling it as work-life balance. We're still consultants. We're not 60 hours a week living out of a suitcase, last flight out on Sunday, last flight back out on Friday, and then you're back on the road again. But you're still consulting. So we sold work-life balance and we were getting people that were oh, so I've hit 35. That's good for the week, right? So we had a year with some turnover issues where it was what are we selling them on the front end of this? And it was oh, we're selling them something that doesn't exist when they get here. So let's not brand it that way. Let's talk about what it actually means to work here and our community impact and what we value and the transparency. And let's talk about those things. So I think a good consultant, a good student team helps the company implement it in a way that can make some money. And and I didn't really even because we're more B2B, but there's a B2C component of that as well for your average consumer packaged good that, especially now that Gen Z has disposable income. And by the way, they're turning 27 this year, the oldest Gen Z, and millennials are turning 41 and we care. And so for me, when I'm out shopping and I see the B Corp logo, I'm probably going to pick that product, even if it costs a little bit more. So I think that there's starting to be a mark, an actual ROI on sales for B2C companies as well.
I definitely agree. I'm thinking of companies like Bomba Socks or Tom's Shoes, where it seems like their entire business model is this 1-for-1 exchange, where for every shoe or sock they sell, they donate a shoe or sock. And that's a really great idea if they're doing it right from the start. But is this something that, those are large businesses. They're not exactly mom and pop. So is this something that only large businesses can afford to do, or is it something that you can incorporate as a smaller company? And also, what are some of the obstacles that small businesses might run into when they're trying to obtain this certification?
I think it's easier doing it from the get-go. Just as somebody who's been at a company that scaled, and I have a friend who's an attorney and he's going through recertification, And when he started it, it was just him. And he was like, man, that was really easy.
Right.
And now he's got 10 attorneys working for him. And he's got offices in 2 states. He's like, whoo, this is a lot more complex now. But again, at least he had all the frameworks in place. So he's been tracking all these things. It's much easier the second go around. But yeah, I think it's a lot harder to do it once you're bigger. I mean, Danone just did it. The big, yogurt dairy company, Dannon Yogurt, whatever. Danone North America is now the biggest B Corp in the world. And like, you're turning around an ocean liner, versus when you're small. I think you're maybe just reversing course on a little speedboat, which is anybody who's been on both of those knows the difference.
Right.
But it's much easier to turn that speedboat pretty quickly. So I think it's easier to bake this in from the beginning and it becomes part of your company DNA. But I also think it's pretty cool that some of these bigger companies are stepping up and like, hey, if we're going to say we're doing all these things through our marketing department, maybe we should start doing all these things and not just doing them through the marketing department. So, yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to see some bigger companies come into the fold lately. But then you've got the Patagonias and the Warby Parkers and the Toms. And I know you're not videoing me, but I normally would be like, look at my Tom shoes and my Bombas socks, but I've been sick for a couple of days, so I'm in like sweats and just some old socks right now. But normally I am wearing Tom sandals. But yeah, those are 2 of my favorite brands. Tom's of Maine. There's a bunch of really cool, bigger companies that in a weird way have been our flagships for a long time. But now you're starting to see new flagships. Like for us in Georgia, it was Creature Comforts. Was it about a month ago? Maker's Mark. In Kentucky, a bourbon company in Kentucky, certified as a B Corp. Like, break down some Southern stereotypes for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're starting to see some newer and newer. Like even I was in an event a couple of weeks ago, and Bell's Brewing was speaking, and they're looking at doing it. New Belgium, like you've got some bigger companies that, and over the last like 5-10 years, it's kind of accelerated, and you're seeing. Whereas I think it used to be more of a small like 5 to 25 employee kind of niche. Now it's like some of them are multinational corporations. Even us, 150 will probably be 200 in a couple months because we're kind of going through one of those spurts right now.
Yeah.
And seeing some of those companies, even last year, some of the companies in Georgia that went through it, 150 employee accounting company, 100 employee marketing agency, 150 employee engineering firm, like you're starting to see some really decent. And then let's be honest, that is the majority of American jobs are in that kind of 50 to 250, that small, medium business space.
I like that you brought up all of these, companies that you have references for as far as what they're working towards it. Can you give me some other businesses? You mentioned a couple of them. I mean, can you talk about some of the causes that they're dealing with? Because it's easy to put this certification on there and then, what are they actually doing? Like, what are the causes that they're working towards?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you a really cool one here with Creature. That's our slang for Creature Comforts in Athens. Is they have the Get Comfortable Fund, which they started, and it's its own nonprofit. They have a board of directors that they brought in from the community within Athens to run it. And they since pivoted, but originally it was like, okay, so we have a giving problem and everybody gives a little bit to everybody. And so nothing really gets done. So what are the biggest, they brought in data to figure out what are the biggest problems facing Athens, Clarke County, which is one of the, honestly, per capita, I think it might be the poorest county in the state of Georgia, even though we have that bright and shiny university and football stadium and indoor practice facility, like the county itself, not that affluent. And so what are the biggest problems facing the community? And then which organizations are doing the most to do something about it? And so they took those 2 metrics of data, and then they basically became the fundraising vessel. And they brought money in, basically funneling all this energy and these resources together and harnessing that energy in a more collective way to the problems that need to be solved. And they've recently, this year, they're actually pivoting because they've done, they got some more research done, and they've worked with the university on some of this research, but it's discovering that there's the third grade. Third grade is when you switch from reading to learn, learning to read to reading to learn. And so it is a giant marker in education gap, which becomes wealth gap, which becomes education level attained, which becomes, lifetime earning value and all these things. So they're working on a pilot program with their Get Comfortable Fund to address, working with one elementary school in Athens to address can we work on third grade literacy levels? And so they partnered with some really cool nonprofits, Books for Keeps, and a couple different nonprofits in Athens to figure out how we tackle this along with the public education system. So that's to me, that's a really cool one. Just from, A, local, but B, unique approach to corporate giving.
Yeah.
And I know for us, a lot of it, we try to volunteer our talent. So given that we do Salesforce consulting, can we get our employees involved with nonprofits that can't afford Salesforce, but would love the technology? And Salesforce provides those licenses for free to nonprofits. You get up to 10 licenses free. So then we'll put like some consultants on them. We did a little like 1-day hackathon last year where we worked with 4 nonprofits and implemented Salesforce. So I think there's a lot of cool stuff like that going on behind the scenes of just small local impact. But even we did a bigger project later in the year for the Minority Football Coaches Association. Like, you watch the NFL in the news and it's like, oh, here's this whole association that's trying to build a database from like JV coaches, Pop Warner coaches, all the way up into the NFL. And it's like, they don't have a CRM. So like they're keeping all this stuff in the, so if, some Division II college is looking for a defensive backs coach, there's this whole database of like, well, there's this guy who coaches high school, down the street from you. And how do we actually, put some intention behind diversifying the coaching ranks in football? Like, what a brilliant cause to get behind. So, we'll throw time at stuff like that. But yeah, those are 2 that popped to me off the top of my head just from firsthand knowledge of what they're doing. But I think even Tom's has pivoted because, they got a lot of blowback for the 1-for-1 shoes model where, they were, in a weird way, the model's great in theory, but then you think about the local impact and you've got some cobbler in some, village in Africa making shoes, and Tom shows up down the street and dumps a trailer of shoes off. You put them out of business. So,
right.
How could they be, it was, the intention was great. The impact wasn't necessarily awesome. So pivoting away from something like, how can you be more strategic with a 1-for-1 model where you're not also, sometimes our charity, especially in Africa, sometimes our charity isn't as well impacted as it was intended. And it ends up kind of, suppressing local makers. So I think there's been a lot of attention to like, and that's where I love the creature model of like, let's put some data behind the impact we're actually making with our charitable contributions. And, you can you donate money. If you just go drink at their brewery downtown on the month of your birthday, they'll donate in dollars the amount of years you are. So I'm proud to say I donated $39 in January. And they do corporate sponsorships. So, they do a bunch of fun ways to get involved. So, but yeah, those are a couple of the cool ones. And I think it's kind of unique. And I think once you quantify that number and you go through the assessment and you're like, okay, here's the number we need to hit. And then you can get creative with it. Like, okay, it's some semblance of volunteerism and it's community, pro bono stuff. It's community, it's dollars. And then what's important to us. And you get back to the branding piece of like the value of, we do a lot of work upstream with organizations looking to diversify the tech ecosystem. And I realize that if we get our company from, 10% Black employee to 20%, but the ecosystem that we're in, Salesforce is still 3%. Have I really done anything other than, okay, I've obviously created a very inclusive work environment. We've done a good job with, we've gotten the 3% of that ecosystem to come work for us. But like, if the ecosystem's still 3%, we haven't really solved any of the problem. So for me, it's fun to get to work with, organizations upstream that, 10, 15 years from now, maybe we're not, if you think about Salesforce, and the consultants in that industry and Salesforce as a whole, as a company, we're not all battling for the same 3% of that ecosystem. Now it's, 10, 20%. And when we put a job opening out, we're getting a diverse pool of applicants. And like that to me is a lot of what's cool about the things you see in the B Corp space. It's people thinking a little bit more intentionally about how they're giving and how they're giving back and what problems are you actually trying to solve, or is it only about your own personal annual impact report?
Yeah, you bring up a lot of good points there. One of the causes that I'm very interested in is, homelessness and affecting homelessness. And, I was listening to something the other day about homelessness in the state of California. Now, I'm not in the state of California, so I've really got no place to judge them. But there was a statistic that came out that said something like, I want to say there was a multi-billion-dollar budget for the state of California to fight their homelessness, and yet they have one of the worst homeless problems in the country. And one of the things that I saw in there was, some of these directors of the organizations that are doing this, they're getting like, 6 and sometimes 7-figure salaries every single year to deal with this problem that's not changing at all. So I think that's a really cool innovation and sort of mindset that the B Corp model sort of provides, is just like what you said, the exact, how are we doing this? Like not just putting your money into this program and, hey, look, we donated all this money to this nonprofit, but what is that nonprofit actually doing? What is that company actually, implementing into the real world?
Yeah, and I think too, there's an element of businesses can and should be involved in solving some of society's biggest issues. But I also heard a quote. It was David Paparelli, who started a startup here in Georgia. They just opened an office in London, but he used to work for Thrive, which is one of our B Corp coffee roasters in Georgia, and they do all the coffee for Chick-fil-A. So now you know who they are. Next time you get a cup of coffee from Chick-fil-A, you go, oh, Thrive Roasters. But David had a quote. We were on a panel together, or I was hosting it. I don't remember, but he said something of, entrepreneurs are the most, throughout history, entrepreneurs have been solving society's problems. You think about, like, entrepreneurs see a need and they come up with a product to solve it. So they have that skill set inherently within them. So why would we not use that for some of society's other problems that maybe, that just, okay, so the homeless person might not have disposable income to buy a product, but how do we solve homelessness? And I look at a lot of those problems the same way, like I was talking about, diversity in the tech space. Like, what is the upstream solution? Like, how do we think about problems with a 10, 15, 20 year range and start thinking about, like, upstream? What does that solution look like? So yeah, we have to take care of those who are homeless now and find them work. And I mean, Grayson Bakery is another great example. I didn't mention. Grayson Bakery does no background checks. It's a bakery out of Brooklyn. It was started by two, like, Bernie Glassman in the 70s. He was like a monk. He started his, like, monastery in Brooklyn. Wow. And their whole thing, though, is this open hiring policy. But they're envisioning kind of like that's like a current day solution. And then I think, to like, hey, we're not going to drug test you. We don't background check you. We don't care if you've been arrested. A lot of those issues that go into long-term homelessness. And they just are like, and, they have counselors on hand. So if you have a drug, if you slip up or something, they'll get you help and your job's still there. But you literally put your name on a list and they call you when the job's open. And they're like, hey, the job's open, and you just come in and you start working. There's no pee in a cup. There's no any of that. So that's a really cool one. But yeah, I think there's a long-term vision too to solve some of these things, where we wake up in 20, 30, 40 years. Because I think at the root of what you said too is there's an element of, like, what's my incentive to really solve the problem? You get into that kind of like that, like, hold on to it mentality. That just like you do market share, just like you do, profitability growth, or you do a hefty salary, what's my problem to really do any better if I'm also protecting my livelihood? So I think there's competing motives there that might not be the best. And I understand you also need really talented people to solve problems like homelessness. So you need to get them out of the private sector. But I think that the B Corp thing presents a pretty cool model because it's the private sector trying to solve some of these problems.
Well, I want to go back to something that we talked a little bit earlier, because you were speaking a little bit about millennials and Gen Z, and they have more of sort of a vested interest in these ideals that companies are doing. One of the big things that's been going around right now is this term, the Great Resignation, where people are just leaving their jobs. And do you think any of that is caused by the concepts that B Corps incorporate or into these corporate lifestyles?
I won't say that, yes, absolutely. But I think that is a big, I don't know that I would associate B Corps with it, other than I would say that the principles that they adhere to.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen data around this, but just from all my, friends in the B Corp industry and associates and colleagues and B Local and all the companies we work with that aren't experiencing this, really, I mean, we haven't been hit by it at all. It's the usual attrition that is consulting, where I think sometimes we get people into consulting that they're like, that sounds great. And then they get into it and they're like, this is terrible. I don't want to do this at all, right. and then the occasional where we've created an opportunity for somebody to grow and then this next great opportunity just happens to be external to the company and we high five them on the way out. But I think that there is a pushback right now. And I mean, I was there where I was just like, I mean, I literally woke up in 2014 and just quit a job through an email. I was like, I'm never coming back. Don't call me.
Yeah.
Like my option was Uber driver. And I was like, yeah, that sounds better. Anything but coming there another day. And they told me my breaking point was we don't pay you for your ideas. We pay you to do what we told you to do. And I was like, all right, see you later.
Wow.
But I think there is a reckoning right now with kind of that traditional way of doing business and viewing employees as a number. And also there's an element of younger people, and I would include myself in this in the grand scheme of working. I still have 26 years till 35. So I'm only 16 years into 65. Sorry, I'm only 16 years into my working career.
Right.
So I think there's a semblance of like, hey, just be open and honest with us. And for the longest time, there's this element of like, jump. Yes, sir. How high? And it's like, nah, man, what are we jumping for? Like, you need to explain this whole jumping thing. Like, I'll jump for you, but like, get me excited to jump. Like, is there a business reason to why I'm filling this form out? Is there a business reason as to why I have to come back to the office? I just did my job at home for 2 years. I love the flexibility. Is there a business reason that I have to do things this certain way? And I just got off a call with a CEO, just recently certified her B Corp. And we were talking about that. I said, whatever you do, I said, some of the biggest pitfalls we've run into is telling people the decisions we made and mistaking that for transparency. Just because you told somebody doesn't mean you're being transparent. They want to know the why. They want to understand what went into the decision-making process. They want to understand how it affects their lives. And then maybe sometimes they just want to either complain about it, talk about it, ask questions about it, and, helping their managers understand what went into it. So, because the call is going to go to their manager, not to you. So helping their manager get behind it and rally them behind it. And, it's never going to be a majority rules. I think that's why people go and start their own businesses. Right. So they get to make the decision. But I think there's an element of that is more valued. And just a quick anecdote. I heard a story. This is probably a couple of years ago. I think it was Rick Neuheisel, who played football at UCLA, and then he coached at UCLA in Colorado and I think Washington. Anyway, somebody was asking him the difference in the generations of football players, of when he was coaching versus when he played in the early 80s at UCLA. And he said, when I was playing, they said, we're running this play. And you said, yes, sir. And he said, the difference now is when I tell a player what play we're running, they said, why are we running that, coach? They want to understand that and it's not from a place of disobedience. They're just trying to understand what's the game plan. Like, they're trying to become smarter and better and savvier. And I think good bosses are understanding that and realizing that, like, you can help your employees grow and learn and develop. And yeah, like I usually, we've had several of them. Like, you get to a certain point at a consultant, no matter how fast we scale, if somebody comes calling and you're, a senior or whatever, and there's a director position open and you get to go be the guy or the girl at this company. I don't know. I think if you get the chance to be the boss and you get a great opportunity, those women that leave, those men that leave, we're high-fiving them out the door versus I think some bosses are afraid to lose people. And I think that's I heard a quote from a friend of mine last year, and she's taking her company through B Corp certification. And she called me because she was like, yeah, one of my favorite young women is leaving and she's been with her forever and she's mentored her. And she's like, man, part of me was like, man, this stinks. And then she said, but then I had to catch myself and think, what kind of a leader am I if I'm not excited for that young woman and her next opportunity?
Yeah.
And that's like servant leadership. And I think that's the difference is like bosses like her are getting it. And these bosses that are experiencing this and these organizations that are experiencing I'm hoping it sinks in, but I think there's just a disconnect there with what is the shift that is happening right now, and that it's not a fad, it's not a trend, it's not going back. We are going to demand more from our bosses while still being realistic about how companies make money. And I think because there's still some semblance of that with younger employees, they don't necessarily have the whole picture. We all wanted the C-suite office when we were 23. I could run this company so much better. Right. No, you couldn't.
Right.
No, you couldn't. But that's never going to be a generational thing. We've joked about that. I was like, my dad probably said the same thing.
Right.
It's like my boss said the same thing. I said the same thing. So
That's a great point that you make. It really seems like a lot of that great resignation is just a keyword, but it's really about celebrating people's successes, I think, and just making their impact that they're making on your company known. It's a great point that you make. We are, getting towards the end of the episode, but I want to make sure that people know where to find you because you're a great resource for information about B Corps, but also just the business of being good. So I'm really impressed with what you've been doing online and everything like that. I know you've got a podcast. Where can people find that, and where can people find you on the internet, social media, all that stuff? Tell me where you'd go.
yeah. So let's see. The only social media I still use is LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I've given up on the rest. I do have an Instagram for my Christmas decorations,
Hey, there you go.
which is a fun follow. But no, my LinkedIn is LinkedIn Nathan A. Stuck. We're about to move the podcast onto another website, but for right now, it is on Be the Change Georgia. It's available on all the major podcasting sites, but my production team is chatwithleaders.com. And then if you go into Be the Change Georgia, you'll find our podcast.
Well, like I said, Misfits, we'll go ahead and put that information down in the show notes below. Go ahead and check Nathan out. He's a great follow on there, and he's got some great insight into his podcast. I really like what you do, so I've learned a lot from it.
Always happy to connect. Always happy to answer more questions about B Corp. So don't be afraid. I think a lot of people are like, I like to say a lot of people are bad at networking. Just reach out. Worst case happens when you reach out to somebody, they don't answer.
Right.
But worst case, if you never reach out to them, you'll never get in touch with them.
That's true. Well, at the end of every episode, I ask all my guests the same question. It's one question in two parts. So, what was the last goal that you completed, and what's the next goal that you want to set for yourself in the future?
Whew.
Everybody always gets a pause right here, and you can say anything. I mean, I had one guy tell me he wants to catch a sturgeon this summer. So,
I think the last goal I accomplished is, I would say, over the last 2 years, and I don't know that it was necessarily a goal other than it was really trying to scale Be Local Georgia and get it to the next level, and my personal brand of just getting on podcasts and doing the work. And I'm not a details person, so I wish I had a better metric than I keep a spreadsheet called speaking engagements. And
Right.
I set a goal last year to do I think I was I was going to do 8 podcasts and get to 2,500 followers on LinkedIn. I got to 20 podcasts and I got to 3,300 followers on LinkedIn. And this year's goal was 4,000 and another 10. And I'll be honest, I have 6 scheduled in the next week and a half. And I'm already at 3,800 and change. So I'm I think I'm going to blow both those goals out of the water, but then also releasing the book, getting the book out. I recorded the speech last year and that was kind of a goal I'd set for myself. And
nice.
I did it after a home game on a Sunday at noon. So I was proud of that Georgia home games, anybody's ever been to Athens for one of those, getting up before noon is a challenge, and recording a speech in front of an empty room and pretending that you're on stage. It was an interesting exercise, but yeah. And then getting that over to a writing team to help me kind of work on this book around helping people find their career with purpose. So really hoping to kind of take off with some of the speaking stuff this year as well, of just telling that story, I didn't get into my whole backstory of this, but when you're young in your career and you're trying to find something that you care about, that you can find your passion, a lot of it won't be there and it's not going to be there for a while. So helping people understand, A, that's okay, but B, make sure you're working harder on yourself than you do at that job you don't like.
Yeah.
And so that when opportunity knocks, you're not just in the shower, you're not out running errands, you're not hanging with friends. When opportunity knocks, you're ready to answer the door. So that's the next big thing for me, is hopefully getting this book out and getting out and sharing that story. And, it is B Corp related, but it's honestly not. It's just, finding your passion and building the skill set so that you can do it when you don't want to wake up at 40 and that job description, you're I would love that. And you're I'm not ready.
I think it's a great idea. Are you going to do an audiobook?
Yeah, I can't wait to narrate it. It's going to be so full of color. It's going to be so me.
Give me a brief 3 seconds. Tell me your life story in 3 seconds. Because I feel bad. We barely talked about it.
I wrote a paper in 10th grade about being an international businessman. I was taking German. My mom's from Berlin, so I was learning German. Thanks, Mom. Shout out for not teaching me German as a child. That was such an easy language to learn. So I was just, I loved business and I loved like econ in high school and I love those classes. And I got to UGA and I was already a sophomore. And so like I was right into Terry College of Business. I got admitted right away, international business. And then I followed a girl back to Athens. And so I took any job in Athens I could find. So next thing I was dispatching chicken trucks in North Georgia. And it was just kind of like, and all of a sudden you're 21, 22, you're managing like grown men, just like driving truck for a living and cutting your teeth and like, but all that operations experience and managing plant relationships. And then I actually moved out to Vegas. I played poker for a little while professionally. I paid my bills. So technically that's professionally. Yeah. You will not find me on the World Series of Poker or any of those. You still don't want me at your home game. And then I took a job with Enterprise. I rented cars for a couple of years. And honestly, if you go to Ad Vic and like, if you work for us and you look at like what our KPIs go out, and I don't even do operations anymore or financial ops. It is what I did. And I set it all up. It's straight out of Enterprise. Like it is the Enterprise playbook of KPIs and what numbers drive revenue. And this is where we are. And this is the percentage increase over last week. And like, so is there anything exciting about renting cars? Not really, but I took that playbook and then when I got into this job, I had that opportunity to kind of, add value in a role that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do, but it allowed me to do all the B Corp stuff and all the purpose and culture and impact. But it became pretty clear like, oh, this guy's a value add, but it was all stuff I took from, even B2B sales. I did 3 years of sales for Enterprise after that and traveled all over Utah and Idaho and Nevada because I was out in Vegas and, all the sales skills, learning how to talk to people, when you're doing, quality, sometimes just employee interviews, like, hey, check-ins, learning how to listen more than you speak, learning how to ask questions, learning how to ask probing questions, learning how to get people open. All that came from sales. So all those jobs that I never really cared about all gave me skills that have made me really good at the job I do care about and made me qualified for it. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the career. And I won't even get into the 2 years where I told you I had 4 jobs in 18 months. More chicken trucks. Sold cars for a while back at Enterprise. Oh man. Yeah. I had some doozies that kind of led me down the path to finding B Corps and see, it brings it full circle to the beginning of the interview.
I'm glad you came on. You're a wealth of knowledge and, you definitely, I'm happy that you're doing something that you actually care about now. I mean, that's so pivotal and so important to so many people that they just don't have that. I'm just some guy that is a cashier somewhere, and I don't have any interest in doing this. Finding that personal growth and finding that personal journey that you're on is something that you display very well, and I think you show that in everything that I've seen you do. So, kudos, man, kudos. So
appreciate it, Chris. Thank you. Yeah, just start somewhere. Like you're not going to you can't drive 500 miles if you don't drive the first one. So back out of the driveway, back out of that parking spot, and get going.
Awesome. There's no better way to end than that. I really appreciate your time, Nathan. Thank you very much for coming on. And Misfits, go check them out. Like I said, we've got links to everything down in the show notes. And I've learned a lot from you, buddy. So thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Appreciate it, Chris. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Well, Misfits, we did it. That's our episode. I want to thank you so much for listening, and thanks again to our sponsors. If you want to support any of our sponsors, there are affiliate links on the sponsors tab of our website at www.misfit-heroes.com. You can also find links to all of our social media there, so follow us for immediate up-to-date info about the podcast. Please, if you enjoyed this podcast and you want to help me out, do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button so you're notified of new episodes as they're released, and make sure to leave a rating or review of the show on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Truly, Misfits, I love you. Thank you so much for listening. And until the next episode, be kind, love one another, and be a hero.